Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, and it is brought to you by Prop Swap, America's sports betting marketplace. Sell your sports bets and take your profit. Find out how at PropSwap.com. Geoff Mosher is scheduled to join us for today's Football at 4. We got a lot to dive into as we get closer to the start of training camp. All right, let's bring Geoff Mosher in for today's Football at 4. And when we talked to Mosher on Monday, we had kind of teed up that the running backs were coming out on Tuesday, Mosher, and I had asked you, do you think Miles Sanders would be on that list in the top 10 or in the honorable mention category? You said you didn't think so. Do you know where he landed?
I feel like I thought I said I could see him landing in the honorable mention category, but not the top 10. I feel like that would – there really aren't like 15 really great running backs in the league. So I felt honorable mention would be more of his terrain.
He was an honorable mention. He was one of the guys mentioned. He did not make the top 10. But do you know what the personnel person said? Actually, it was an AFC defensive coach said about Sanders was he's underrated. In a better scheme, he'd be a prominent guy, and he has a great burst. So it sounds like people around the league agree with us that they just didn't use him very well.
Well, they didn't use him very well. Obviously, the offense itself is dysfunctional. The offensive line was beat up. Here's one thing I thought about Miles Sanders last year, and I said this a lot, and it was helpful to have Greg Cosell on with us on Inside the Birds, and he said the same thing. So now I feel like, the good minds think alike here. Miles Sanders ran hard last year. Everybody remembers the 80-yard and 70-yard touchdowns that he had, but he had quite a few good runs inside the goal line, inside the 5. And overall, I thought he ran hard and ran tough and was not just a kind of a scat back who was always trying to bounce it to the outside. I really thought, even on some of those long touchdown runs, Mike, that he had, those were made possible by some really good vision cuts as far as cutting back to the backside of the block. And I thought as a runner, he improved last year from the year before. Now, where he regressed, and you don't know if this was just him not working hard enough or if it was part of the offensive dysfunction, but catching the ball. There were a lot of bad passes that were thrown his way. There were also some catchable passes thrown his way that he didn't make. There was also a few times that they used him in a way that I thought was very advantageous, where they lined him up outside as wide receiver. If you remember the Bengals game, they had him matched up against Akeem Davis-Gaither, the rookie linebacker, and he put a move on Gaither and burned him up the sideline. He was wide open, and Carson threw it about 5 rows in the stands. So that's basically last year in a nutshell. I think the guy has all the talent in the world to be a good running back. The big question on him is, will he go back to being the pass catcher that he was his rookie year? And can he prove with this coaching staff, in this scheme, whatever you want to call it, can he prove to be a running back who you can rely on in the fourth quarter, who can handle the carries that get from 15 to 20? I imagine the Eagles are going to be in a lot of closer games this year and kind of have to gut it out in the fourth quarter. Can he do that if they have a lead? Can he move the chains? If they're behind, but they're still trying to move the ball on the ground in the fourth quarter, can he get that total of carries up to 16, 17, 18, like you saw Brian Westbrook do once he got to year 4 or 5 of his career? Can he be that guy? Because it was clear, for whatever reason, Mike, that last year the coaches did not want to give him the ball in the fourth quarter. Now, they were down in a lot of games, but even when they were running, they did not want to give him the ball in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and one of the things that one of the personnel people in this piece brought up was he's the fastest back in the league when it comes to crossing the line of scrimmage, 21 miles an hour. He's the fastest running back. So he is a big play threat, and I don't think that gets brought up enough.
Yeah, I don't want to call him a secret, right? But you have to go back to his career. When Penn State recruited him, he was, I believe, a 5-star running back recruit because he was just a tremendous athlete with speed and quickness and, shiftiness, everything that you're looking for in a running back. And then Saquon Barkley, who was like a 2 or a 3-star recruit, wound up decommitting to Rutgers, going to Penn State and becoming and blossoming into a superstar to the point where Miles basically had to get whatever scraps Saquon was given up for, in blowout games for a few years. And not until his last year at Penn State did Miles really break onto the scene. And if you talk to NFL scouts, what they really love, especially at the running back position, is to have more than, 8 or 9 games of tape on a guy. They really want to examine these guys to the fullest extent. And there just wasn't a ton of tape on Miles as a feature back in college. That's why he wound up going in the second round. He's also not the biggest guy in the world, but you saw it, though, as a rookie, that he had that electric speed, that he could not only help a team, the Eagles, in the running game, but as a rookie, he caught a couple of passes against Detroit, against Minnesota, that were down the field, 30, 40 yards over the shoulder. He had that playmaking ability to him. So, yes, he has the measurables that you're looking for at that position. There's no doubt about his athleticism, his speed, his quickness, and all of that.
Yeah, I know, and he's the kind of guy that could, he had multiple, 70-plus yard runs last year. He's a big play, dual threat kind of guy. I'm very interested to see how Sirianni uses him in the pass game, and I guess more than anything, how he utilizes the running back position. I mean, are they going to use 2 guys? Are they going to be kind of a thunder and lightning? Is he going to be the main guy? I know that's something that there's been kind of some thoughts that they're going to try to feature him. I love what they did with Jonathan Taylor in Indianapolis.
Right. A totally different runner, Jonathan Taylor, big, powerful back from Wisconsin, of course, where they breed them. Upright runner, which is not like Miles Sanders, who plays with better pad leverage, but Jonathan Taylor really came on at the second half of the year and kind of became a bell cow for an offense that was trying to – you saw what the Colts did. It's like they brought in Phillip Rivers. He was sort of at the end. They were trying to get whatever they could out of him without having to make him throw the ball, 45, 55 times. They were trying to get the most they could out of Phillip and be as competitive as possible while still being a strong run team, a strong defensive team. And so that's what they were able to get with Jonathan Taylor. I don't think we should expect that kind of similar style of approach here in Philadelphia. We know the owner doesn't really think fondly of big-time running games. He wants passing games. But that doesn't mean that Miles Sanders cannot be a sort of, listen, this is all we have to work with, right? Like when we talk about Eagles running backs, like a Shady or a Westbrook, like a dual threat kind of guy who can hurt you as a runner, as a pass catcher. He obviously has to show that he can handle that kind of workload. But again, the DNA is there for him to be able to do that. And I would think if you really want to know about what the Eagles are going to do with their running game in particular, I'll just say be on the lookout. A lot of this will depend on the kid's development, and I'm talking about Kenny Gainwell for a second here. If Kenneth Gainwell can just as a rookie acclimate as a good pass catcher, good kind of change-up back, watch out for what this coaching staff might do with Miles Sanders and Kenneth Gainwell in the backfield together to create some major mismatches. I know we used to talk about that with what you could do with Darren Sproles and whoever the future runner was at the time, and for whatever reason it may or may not. I mean, LeGarrette Blount and Jay Ajayi weren't those types to pair him with, but Miles Sanders and Kenneth Gainwell gives you more of that opportunity to really stress a defense when you have both of those guys in the backfield.
Over at InsideTheBirds.com, you and Andrew DeCecco are kind of doing some camp questions. Your question, your latest one is, where will the Birds most be exposed? I think this one's kind of an easy 1 or 2 answers, right? It's either linebacker or corner. They are the 2 weakest spots on the field. Is there anything close?
No. I mean, there are certainly question marks, right, at wide receiver, and we still have a lot to see from Jalen Reagor and, of course, Travis Fulgham and what he's going to be, and Devontae Smith. But I feel like it's fairer to have expectations that Devontae Smith's going to be a formidable player in the NFL. He may not be a stud. I have no idea. But you have expectations that a guy picked that high is going to come in and have an impact and be something relative to successful as a rookie. And then, of course, we'll see with Reagor and Ward and Fulgham. But at the end of the day, this linebacker group and the cornerback group, with the exception of Darius Slay, is not going to scare guys like Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady and Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert and, oh my gosh, all those guys I just mentioned are all playing the Eagles in the first 6 weeks of the season, right? along with Matt Ryan week one. They're just not going to. And I get that we have to give Jonathan Gannon a chance to implement his scheme, and then it's going to look different. There's going to be disguise. It's going to be more, at least we expect and hope and hear that there's going to be disguise and more guesswork for the quarterback. But these guys that I just mentioned, they've been around the block. Like they've seen it all. Matt Ryan's seen it all. Mahomes has seen it all. Brady has seen it all. Dak Prescott has seen most of it. Ryan Fitzpatrick has seen it all. So it's great to have guesswork, but at the end of the day, talent is what you need. And when you look at the linebacker level and look at the cornerbacks as we sit here today, and even the safety picture, none of those quarterbacks I mentioned are going to sit there and be very scared to face that kind of back end of a defense. And when the game is won, a lot of the times before the snap, it doesn't really matter what you're doing from a disguise standpoint. They're going to find the holes.
Most you guys looked at the weakest, you looked at the strongest, and I think this one's a little bit more difficult to kind of come up with, which is good. I mean, there's two glaring holes, but where are they the best? Where are their best, positions heading into camp?
Yeah, and not surprising with the Eagles when you talk about what their strengths are, the trenches. It's always the trenches because I think that they do this well, they prioritize and build in the trenches. Now, Andrew felt that the offensive line was the strongest part of the team, and then you can certainly understand that when you have an all-pro right tackle, an all-pro right guard, an all-pro center. But I argued that, yes, while that's true, these guys have been on the team for quite a while. These are all guys who were on the Super Bowl team, and we are several years now removed. It's still a strong point, no doubt, and Sayamalo is a good left guard, and we'll see what happens at left tackle. But no matter what, whoever wins left tackle, we'll all feel good about whoever wins because he won the competition. But again, it's kind of an unproven guy who still has a lot to a lot of development ahead of him at a very premier position, whether it's Mailata or Dillard. When you look at the defensive line, Mike, I felt that was stronger because of fewer question marks. Your two defensive tackles, Hargrave and Cox, are very good. Hargrave really came on in the second half of last year. Obviously, Brandon Graham is who he is, and he showed no signs of decline last year. He made the Pro Bowl for the first time. Barnett, you can call him a question, but when he's healthy, he gives you a standard level of production that's fairly acceptable. Josh Sweat, as a second-year performer last year, broke out 6 sacks. Ryan Kerrigan you bring in. So you can question the depth after that, guys like Ridgeway, the rookies that they drafted, but your top 6 pass rushers are all pretty proven commodities in the NFL. And they're, even though Fletcher Cox and Graham are getting older, they haven't yet showed any kind of signs of wearing down.
Yeah, I would lean to the offensive line, but I think there's more question marks with the injuries there. I like the depth their offensive line has more so than the depth the defensive line has. And the defensive line doesn't have the injury issues as much as the offensive line. So that is a good debate there on which is the strongest position between the two. But I would ask you, if your strongest positions are your offensive and defensive line, that's typically a team that thinks they're going to be pretty good.
Well, yeah, typically. So here's the thing. Here's my motto. If you're strong in the offensive and defensive line, you give your team a really good chance to compete on a week-in, week-out basis, right? But that doesn't mean that you're going to be an unbeatable team. For example, the Cleveland Browns, for the last 3 or 4 years, have had some pretty good pass rushers and a pretty good offensive line. But it wasn't until last year that they were actually formidable. They won 11 games. They made the playoffs, and that's because they had 2 amazing running backs and a scheme that really catered to it. And obviously, they had a pretty good tight end. They had a decent defense. And Baker Mayfield, they kind of worked him along slowly and developed him as the year went on. And they also took advantage of playing a really, last play schedule, of course. They had some really weird bad weather games that they wound up would win in the fourth quarter. So everything kind of went right for them last year. But you can look at years past and say the Browns have actually been pretty strong in the trenches, but they've been an awful team because they were not good at other key positions all around the map. And that's going to be the challenge for the Eagles. They should be able to move the ball as from a running standpoint with their offensive line, should be able to protect the quarterback. They should be able to hit the quarterback. Last year, I think they were the number 1 sack team in the NFL, but their defense was 20th overall because they were weak in cornerback and safety and other areas. So it should keep them competitive, but it doesn't mean that all of a sudden the Eagles are going to be a great team because they're strong in the trenches.
I guess we'll leave with this. Geoff Mosher is with us from the Inside the Birds podcast. It's Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. I guess it was suggested by a former NFL player that the locker room is already lost by Nick Sirianni, that he is not being able to lead these guys. Lane Johnson says, name names. I want some names out here. So do we already have turmoil with the new coaching staff?
You got to love Philly, Mike.
Right?
Look, far be it for me to slam Michael Robinson because he's a Penn Stater, and I got to give him some love for that. And he was a great quarterback at Penn State. I'll say this. There's a lot of unanswered questions with how he delivered information. In other words, when did he talk to these players? Was this recent, or was it back after Sirianni's first two press conferences when everybody and their mother was questioning whether this guy can be a leader of a locker room? So I have no idea who he spoke to. There's no doubt in my mind. I don't think he made it up. I've heard that surmised, and I think that that's irresponsible to say that Michael Robinson made it up. I'd be positive that he did hear this. But the locker room, the roster right now, Mike, is what, at 80, 85? Like, I'm sure there are players who wonder about him, and I'm sure there are players who like him. And if you speak to three players who don't like him, you might be the one who speaks to three players who does like him.
Yeah.
So I would say take it all with a grain of salt. Nobody knows anything about the guy until he starts actually coaching. And a true measure of a coach is really, in my opinion, is how these guys respond when their team loses tough games or the chips or your backs are against the wall. And, certainly in Doug's first few years, the Eagles really rallied around him. And that's kind of made his hallmark as a coach until last year. So we have a lot to find out about Nick Sirianni. I would not be upset by what Michael Robinson said. I would just say that is human nature, that they're in every single locker room. You're going to find people who are skeptical of the head coach, and you're going to find people who love the head coach. I mean, Bill Belichick gets thrown under the bus by his players a lot. And you guys got 6 rings, right?
Yeah.
So how often do you hear guys leave and say, "Oh, I had no fun there"?
I guess it's good, to see Lane Johnson say names then. Say that. Enough with the BS. Like, Lane Johnson, you certainly want that guy in your corner. Like, if those guys are going silent, it's good to see that Lane Johnson's the first guy. By the way, for the people out there, Michael Robinson, the former fullback, running back, I don't know what position he even played in the NFL, but he didn't have a very illustrious career. Says, I'm not going to say any names, but I know some guys in that locker room who they question this guy talking about Sirianni, and they question he can truly lead this team. I mean, that's not a great way to enter camp, I can tell you that much.
It's not, but it's I mean, honestly, it's fair. It's fair to say I'm not sure about this first-year head coach who I never even heard of until now. I mean, don't you think that if you would have asked 10 people about Andy Reid before he coached his first game with the Eagles, you would have found some guys like, I don't know about this guy. I never heard of him before. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to be Andy. I hate when I say that, right? And then people use that. Like, for example, for the offensive line, I'm sure you've heard callers or people say, well, look what happened to the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs when they didn't have an offensive line. This year, the Eagles are going to have a really good offensive line. Okay, it doesn't mean they're going to be the Kansas City Chiefs because they have an offensive line. That one has nothing to do with the other. But the point is, every first-year coach who's not been a head coach is going to come with the question marks, and fans have said the exact same thing about Nick Sirianni. Still, even now, people say, I don't really know about this guy. That's fair. That's normal.
No question. Absolutely. You're right. The Andy Reid thing is a good one because nobody knew who he was. The Sirianni is similar to that. And Doug, by the way, there were questions about him when he got hired as he was the worst hire, all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So, remember, it's everywhere. Joe Judge, go listen to what Giants fans said when they turned down there was a more prominent name head coach. Matt Rule, right? Everybody wanted Matt Rule in New York. He went to Carolina. They hired Joe Judge. And it was like, New York's like, who the hell is Joe Judge? That's just normal.
Yeah. All right. Good stuff. Football at 4 here, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It'll drop tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. with Geoff Mosher, Adam Kaplan. And, of course, you can check that out wherever you listen to your podcast. And check out InsideTheBirds.com for another edition of Football at 4. Tomorrow, Adam Kaplan is here. Andrew's on Friday as we continue our looks at the divisions. And, of course, Eagles training camp is less than 2 weeks away. All right, Geoff, take care, pal.
All right, Mike, thanks for having me. Good talk.
Absolutely. Yeah, real good talk, actually. Good stuff on Miles Sanders.